Putin lost Syria. He lost Venezuela as a client state. And we're in the middle of Iran. We don't know which way it's going to go. But if he loses Iran, again, the Americans did all this powerful stuff grabbing Maduro. Putin can't even seem to hold on to any of his allies, any of his client states. And it does make him look weak. It makes America look like a superpower. It makes Russia look like a failing regional power.
Hello and welcome to Frontline with me, Kate Gerbeau. And today we're talking to the financier and political activist Bill Browder. Sir William is the founder and CEO of Hermitage Capital Management. He was the largest foreign investor in Russia until 2005, but was banned from the country for exposing corruption. He now campaigns to impose sanctions on people linked to the Kremlin and to free political activists. Bill, welcome back. Great to see you again. Thank you for your time. Now, figures published this week point to a big increase in the number of civilian casualties in Ukraine last year compared to previous years since the full-scale invasion. Is there any point in the US envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner going to see Putin in a few weeks' time when there's clearly no intention by Putin to stop bombing people?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious, and it's been obvious since Trump first came back to power, that Putin was not going to compromise. He was not going to back down. And Putin can't back down. Putin needs this war as a war of distraction so that people don't get mad at him. He's completely all invested in this war. And if for some reason the war were to end, all of a sudden he would be having his own political troubles in Russia. So I don't think that the war is going to end. And I think that what's happening right now is, as he gets more and more desperate, as he loses more and more soldiers, the only thing he can do is kill Ukrainian civilians. I mean, he's effectively a terrorist. It's like every day, September 11th, for Ukraine, that regular people are being just killed for no reason. They're not military. These are not military targets. These are just regular people who are getting killed in their apartments by Vladimir Putin because he needs to act out.
And do you think the experience of 2025 in Putin's head, where he refused calls for a ceasefire with no consequences for him, that he is now convinced that he can continue the war and keep geopolitical relations with the US?
Well, that has been the absolute clear message from Donald Trump, which is that for reasons that we don't understand, Donald Trump refuses to impose any penalties on Putin. And so what Putin is hoping for is that even though he's suffering unbelievable casualties, and we're talking about 1,000 men are being killed, 1,000 Russian soldiers are being killed every day. But what he's hoping for is that we are going to tire before he does. And he thinks that because he's living in a dictatorship. In his dictatorship, there's nobody to vote him out. So he can impose the most extreme penalties on his own people. And even if we only experience 1/100th the pain in our democracies and our free media and so on, we're all, tying ourselves up in knots saying, well, should we be carrying on supporting Ukraine? And that's his big bet, is that we're going to abandon Ukraine before he runs out of resources to continue this war.
And yet the year started with a more muscular America, more aggressive rhetoric, willing to intervene in Venezuela, talk about taking Greenland by force if necessary, and attacking Iran. How do you think this is being viewed inside the Kremlin?
Well, so on one hand, the Kremlin is dancing the jig. They're looking at this and saying, if America wants to take Greenland, why is anyone giving us a hard time about taking Crimea or Ukraine, whatever? That's one argument, one reason for them to celebrate. However, on the other hand, and this is very important, is that the American military operation to take Maduro was a spectacular success militarily for the Americans. To be able to go in, completely immobilize all of their defenses, grab the dictator, the illegitimate dictator of a rogue regime, take him out and not lose a single American life, that looks very powerful compared to Putin, who's been in his special military operation for 4 years and has lost over 1 million soldiers.
And what do you think that US intervention in Venezuela is actually having on Russia's relationships with that country and also with Iran?
Well, what the other downside for Putin is that he has a bunch of what I call client countries or allied relationships. There was Syria, there was Venezuela, there was Iran, and Putin lost Syria. He lost Venezuela as a client state. And we're in the middle of Iran. We don't know which way it's going to go. But if he loses Iran, again, the Americans did all this powerful stuff grabbing Maduro. Putin can't even seem to hold on to any of his allies, any of his client states, and it does make him look weak. It makes America look like a superpower. It makes Russia look like a failing regional power.
And do you think this US willingness to intervene will make other countries any bolder in other areas, for example, targeting Russian oil and its shadow fleet?
Well, it all depends on what Donald Trump is saying privately on phone calls to Keir Starmer or Emmanuel Macron or whatever. In one sense, by him going after the Venezuelan shadow fleet, which happens to also overlap with the Russian shadow fleet, Putin, again, he's being humiliated. On the other hand, we don't hear any announcements of Trump taking over and boarding shadow fleet boats belonging to Russia that have nothing to do with Venezuela. He's doesn't seem to be doing that at all. Now, there is one person who's dealing with the shadow fleet in his own special way, and that's Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. And he is systematically immobilizing these ships as they sail into the Black Sea, and sometimes doing it outside of the Black Sea. And so I think that I think that's probably the most interesting strategy, is not what Keir Starmer or Emmanuel Macron is going to do, but what Zelensky is going to do going after these ships.
Because, for example, in the Times this week, Britain has identified, it's reported a new legal basis to seize illegal oil tankers with the Sanctions and Money Laundering Act, where ships are being deemed to be stateless. I mean, it seems extraordinary that this has not been explored before, and a bit baffling why these gaps are being used and can be exploited to keep the trade going.
Well, I mean, it's the Russians don't abide by any international law. For us to be sort of tying ourselves up into knots about whether it is or isn't subject to international law. If these are pirate ships, they're out in the middle of the sea. If we're going to be all lawyering up, we should just hand over the information to the Ukrainians and let them do their work, because they seem to be doing it a lot more effectively.
Do you think the City of London could do anything more to actually, against what it is a hub of maritime services and has been for decades, could it play a greater part in plugging the gaps? I
think so. I mean, I think at the end of the day, London has always been the city of enablers, for the Putin regime, for the oligarchs, and for all that type of stuff. And some of that stopped when the war began, but some of it carried on. And you mentioned, the insurance companies, the maritime, the shipping companies, and then we also have the law firms. There's one very special lawyer, Lord Wolfson, who is the shadow attorney general. He's a conservative. He's in the shadow cabinet as the shadow attorney general, and at the same time, he is a barrister representing Roman Abramovich in his fight about frozen money in Jersey. And I mean, in the world of what looks to me like a conflict of interest as a shocking.
What would you like to see happen there?
Well, I think that the leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, should say to him, you can do one or do the other. If you want to do your law stuff, and it's understandable, maybe you want to make the millions that Abramovich is paying you, then I think you should not be the shadow attorney general. Or if you want to be the shadow attorney general, then hand over that dossier to one of your colleagues. But if it's a British policy to go after Abramovich's money, both from a sanctions standpoint and from a Chelsea, the proceeds from the Chelsea Football Club, you can't have a person whose job it is to either be a critic of the policy or support the policy and the opposition on the front bench, also being incentivized by Abramovich. You just can't have those two things happening.
What about the ordinary Russian people at the moment? 4 years of war, how is that impacting their daily lives?
Well, they can't travel to. They used to be able to get on airplanes to Europe and vacation in the south of France and in Italy and all that kind of stuff. And I think the number of Schengen visas issued has gone down by like 90%. To the extent that they can get there, they can't travel directly. They got to go through all these different places. The Ukrainians are closing down the airspace in Russia all the time with drone attacks. So that people over the holidays were stuck in airports, sleeping on the floor for hours because all the planes were canceled. You've got the Ukrainians blowing up systematically Russian oil refining capacity to make gasoline, and so they have gasoline shortages all over Russia. And then, of course, there's the absolute horrific genocide, I would say, of young people, Russian people. Putin has sent, according to the Ukrainian statistics, somewhere around 1.2 million young men have either been killed or permanently disabled through this war, and that's a lot of people. I mean, that's an unimaginable amount of people, and I can't imagine that everybody is not privately thinking that this has got to stop.
And there are reports also that violent crime in Russia is on the increase as well.
Yeah, well, so you have, to the extent that any of these guys come back home, they've been totally socialized to kill, to maim, kill, rape, dismember, do all sorts of other terrible things to the Ukrainians that they come across. And all of a sudden, these psychologically damaged people are when they're done, if they are done, if they're not killed in action, are then coming back and doing the same thing in Russia. And Putin can't really be too attacking of them because they're the guys he needs on the front line ready to throw themselves into the meat grinder.
We used to talk of the US as being the policeman of the world, and you talked earlier about how the muscular action that Donald Trump's administration has shown, has actually shown the weaknesses in Putin's Russia. And a Russian state TV host is now calling for potential military action by Russia in Armenia and saying now's the time. He's saying to hell with international law and global order. Should Armenia be worried about this, do you think? Or do you think Russia is concerned about losing Armenia to the West?
Well, Russia already lost Armenia. So Russia was so stretched with all their ill-founded military action in Ukraine. They used to be the protector of Armenia against Azerbaijan. And Azerbaijan said, well, these guys are looking the other way. They're distracted. They're weak. They've sent their best people out. And so they took Nagorno-Karabakh in which was an Armenian enclave. And Armenia is now basically no longer confident of the relationship that they had with the Russians because they didn't they didn't shore up their end of the bargain. And so whatever this TV host is saying about this, it's gone. Armenia is no longer a Russian
But he's
client
actually
state.
inciting Russia to take it back, to intervene. I mean, do you think that there are dangers in countries close to Russia by its willingness to, I mean, where would be next, for example?
Well, I mean, there's another thing going on which hasn't gotten a lot of media attention, but in Moldova, there's a disputed part of Moldova called the Transdniester region, and there's a whole group of Russian soldiers who have now been effectively surrounded. The Ukrainians and the Moldovans have surrounded them, and so they no longer have access to resupply, et cetera, and they may be in a difficult place. And so Russia is losing geopolitically in every other place. And by the way, one other thing is, in addition to losing their client states, if their whole reason for going into Ukraine was they claim NATO enlargement, that was one of the pretexts. Well, guess what? While they're fighting a war in which they've lost 1.2 million men of their own soldiers in Russia, Finland and Sweden have joined NATO, which is something that was completely unexpected and has gone completely against whatever their stated goals for this special military operation.
Just to talk about Ukraine's security, and this week it officially awarded its prime lithium deposit to an American-linked group of investors. Do you think that kind of business dealing linked with the future of Ukraine is actually improving its chances of security long term?
It's the whole minerals deal. There was this minerals deal.
Yeah.
Trump said we want to get our money back from the military aid that they gave to Ukraine, and therefore Ukraine should hand over all its minerals. And they signed this this deal. I think actually whatever Ukraine signed, they knew better what they were giving away than what the Americans thought they were getting. Because if there had been so many minerals in Ukraine, why haven't they been exploited up until now? And I can tell you the answer because I was an investor in that part of the world. And the answer is they haven't been economic to exploit. And when you're doing a big mining project where you're trying to extract stuff from the ground, you have to bring in a huge amount of billions of dollars of capital to equipment, machines, et cetera. And then your profit comes in the future. And in the world of finance, there's a concept, it's called the discount rate, which says if you get money in the future and you have a high discount rate, it's worth a lot less now in the present. And therefore, if the discount rate is so high, and what makes the discount rate high, war is something that makes the discount rate high, corruption, uncertainty. And so there's no, for any person putting pen to paper and doing an analysis of whether you want to put a lot of money into the ground in Ukraine today for some payment in the future, it's not worth it. And so I don't know if, whatever people who are dancing, to saying how great it is they've done this deal, I can't imagine that when in the cold light of day and the reality that they're going to get a whole lot of lithium anytime in the short term or a lot of profit from that.
So that's a no then. The World Economic Forum is next week in Davos. It's supposed to connect leaders to make sense of global challenges. Is there likely to be a way forward from this meeting for Ukraine, do you think? Are we expecting anything to come of it?
Well, the good thing about the World Economic Forum is that there's a lot of Ukrainian allies who will be there. All the Europeans will be there. That you'll have Merz from Germany, Macron, the Finnish Prime Minister. I don't know whether Keir Starmer is going, but there'll be a lot of people who are friends of Ukraine there. And then there will be the Americans who Donald Trump doesn't seem to be a friend of Ukraine, but oftentimes when Trump is around a lot of friends of Ukraine, he softens his strange and fickle attitude, at least in the very short term.
What would you like to see come of it for Ukraine?
Well, I mean, what I always want to see for Ukraine, which is military aid and devastating sanctions on Russia's oil industry so that they can't afford their war.
And when we last talked, you were with your friend, the political activist Vladimir Kara-Murza, who you campaigned to get released from prison famously, and with us a lot as well. And he spoke about how when he was imprisoned, it was really important not to be forgotten. And that knowing that he hadn't been forgotten was keeping him alive, really. Is there anybody you'd like to mention who is in prison in Russia at the moment who we should not forget?
Well, there's one person in particular. His name is Alexei Goranov. Alexei Goranov was the very first person who was arrested under this law that says you can't call the war a war in Russia. He was a municipal deputy in the city of Moscow, and he made some very, very mild negative comments about the war in Ukraine. And he was arrested and sentenced to many years in jail. He's extremely frail. I believe that from pneumonia, he's missing one of his lungs, and he's in really dire straits. And we were hoping with hope that he would have been released as well when Vladimir Kara-Murza was released. He's still in prison. He's one that I mean, there's many people like him, but he's one that I have a particular interest in. We gave him the Magnitsky Award, which is an award that we give each year to heroes who stand up to dictatorships. And I pray that he survives his prison sentence, and I'm not certain that he will.
Is it possible to have any contact with him? Is anyone in contact with him?
Well, I think his lawyers from time to time are able to get through to him, but he's not doing well, and he's one of many hundreds, if not thousands, of political prisoners in Russia today.
Bill Browder, Sir William, great to speak to you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Frontline with me, Kate Gerbeau. For more on the war in Ukraine, please subscribe to this channel. And for the latest news and updates, you can also head over to The Times' YouTube channel. You can also read the latest on thetimes.com. And remember, if you want exclusive updates and content, sign up for a membership right here. For now, though, thanks for watching.